Hey there, it's Chris Yee from Life Abundant Consulting, and I'm here on Mercer Island in Seattle. And I wanted to talk to you today, Friday, about this title I'm calling I'm Angry. Time to Mobilize the Team. And I wanted to talk to you about this because I find that when I'm angry, um, and many other negative emotions, that if I respond in that state, then oftentimes the outcome is not so pretty. I usually do things that don't serve my greater purpose. And I wanted to share with you 3 team members that can help you with responding in a way that moves you in the direction of your higher version of yourself and a place that promotes growth and happiness. So, I wanted to say first that when you're angry, and when I'm angry, my response is often, in the true Chris E form, is to yell back. Um, and in many other emotions, such as sadness or regret or shame, sometimes our response is to do nothing. And that's what we call being stuck. So if you're experiencing the emotion of some of these negative feelings, then the response is often times to do absolutely nothing. Or sometimes worse is to watch a ton of TV, or to eat a bunch of junk, or to drink a bunch of alcohol, or something to alleviate the pain of the feeling that you're experiencing. So I want to introduce the 3 team members that can really move you in the direction of the greater version of yourself. And those three team members are in your mind, and I'll get to them in just a second. But first, I want to tell you a little story about my response to my baby girl. Not so baby now; she's 5 years old, just turned 5 recently. But there was a time when I was really wanting to find a way to contribute to the family and to allow my wife to sleep, really. And so I decided that I was going to get up and wake the girls up, get them ready for school, feed them, and bring them to school, and let my wife have some mornings where she could sleep in. And I would had a number of days where I would be waking up my youngest girl, and I would gently come and rub her shoulder and say, "It's time to get up now." And she would open her eyes and she would start yelling at me. And she's like, "That's not the right way. That's not the right way. You're doing it wrong. I don't like you. Go away. Get out of here." It was like, oh my God. So immediately my feeling was anger. And my response was, "Well, you just got to get up because we don't have time. You got to get out of here." And I think I even picked her up and brought her downstairs. And for the rest of the day, I kind of felt like crap because I got into this angry state, and I reacted and responded in a very lower version of myself, an unskilled way. So I want to just take a moment to think about what is actually happening when that happens. And so let's first talk about breaking down what happened there in that incident. The first thing is that there was a stimulus, and that stimulus for me was my daughter saying that you're doing it wrong. I don't like you. Go away. That is the stimulus. And my emotional response to that was anger. But it's really important to recognize that when somebody stimulates you, and you have an emotional response, it's oftentimes more than just one emotion. So, in thinking about it some more, it was more than just me being angry. It was also me feeling guilty, like I'm not being a good father. I'm doing it wrong. I felt sad because I wasn't connecting with my daughter the way I really had wanted to and planned to and thought would be the best thing. I felt ashamed that I wasn't being the father that I wanted to be. So there was a mixture of emotions, and I want to start by just saying that um, emotions are good. Okay, I'm not I'm not saying anything bad about emotions. In fact, one of the most important things to do is to actually name the emotions that you're experiencing, and not just the predominant one, which is anger for me, but also naming all the other ones. And they've done studies to show that if you name the different emotions, either by writing them down or saying them, identifying them, that in itself, which people might call emotional intelligence, being able to recognize, number one, that you're having an emotion, and number two, what those emotions are, that just identifying them alone is healing in itself. And that brings a great deal of well-being to people just by saying the emotions that you're experiencing. So that's the first thing, is first to recognize that you're having an emotion. Second of all, to name those emotions. So we have a stimulus, and then we have this experience of emotion. And then between the stimulus and this emotion and the response, there is a space. So you have a stimulus, you have a emotion, and then you have a space until you reach the response or your action. And there is a very powerful quote that Stephen Covey says, and he attributes Viktor Frankl for this quote, and that is this: between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in the space lies our freedom and our power to choose our response. We get to choose. We have the freedom and power to choose our response. Even though we have an emotion and a stimulus, it doesn't mean that we have to respond in accordance to that emotion or that stimulus. And he finally goes on to say, in our response lies our growth and our happiness. So that's important. Where is our growth and our happiness? It's in our response. That is where our happiness and growth lie. So I want to go and talk a little bit more about those three team members that are in your mind, because you have a stimulus, you have an emotion, maybe you've gone on to name those emotions, which is healing in itself, and then you have this space. And in this space, you get to choose how you're going to respond. And most of us usually don't even recognize that there's a space there. What's really interesting is actually when they look at animals' brains, and they look at a stimulus like food, for instance, the food, and then the eye, and then the part of the brain that is responsible for response is like super small. That's a rat or something like that. And so the literal space between the stimulus of seeing food and eating that food in the brain, that space is very small. But in humans, we have all these complex places between hearing my daughter yell at me and tell me I'm doing things wrong, from that space and that stimulation in my brain to the parts of my brain that are going to actually make me do a physical response. There is literal space. There is literal many neuron connections that go on before I actually make my response, which in the reactive way is yelling back or grabbing her and bringing her downstairs. That would be the reflexive or reactive space, but response. But we do have space in our mind, and so I want to talk about the three team members that we can call upon to help us to make the response that is greatest in creating our growth and our happiness. And those three team members are dun, 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 curiosity, courage, and compassion. And so what's important is that we have many team members in our mind when we experience a stimulus. And of course we have the stimulus being my daughter yelling at me, and the immediate and predominant team member is the team member saying anger and shame. Those are the predominant team members that want me to react on that piece of information. But there are other team members that are involved, and it's important for us to call upon those other team members before we make a response. And I again want to encourage you to call upon curiosity, that team member, courage, and compassion, and get all of the information that's available to you before you make a response. So, talking about curiosity, um, I think that's one place where if you have a vision for your life and how you want your relationship to be, like I have a vision for what I want my relationship to be with my youngest daughter, then I can get curious. I can get curious about what is it that I really want to experience out of this relationship, and what is it that her need is here. I can start to ask these questions about why things are happening, and curious about how I can do things to move in the direction of my vision of how I want my relationship to be. And then courage would be the courage to, do the thing that I feel fearful around, which is to face my vulnerabilities. Facing my feeling of shame and my feeling of sadness. That takes some courage to look at that and to see why I'm responding so viscerally and about her yelling at me. And then compassion, which is, of course, taking care of and believing in the highest good for her, and just loving her in the greatest way, and taking all that information and and sending it in a way that will allow me to react in the best interest of our relationship. So, I did this after the fourth or fifth time. I finally said, "Oh man, it's ruining my day every time I have to wake her up and yell and be yelled at and then yell back. So I need to find another way." And so I did take into account these three team members of curiosity, courage, and compassion. And it turned out that um, instead of yelling, I got down on the ground and I said, "Baby, what are you experiencing? What's happening? You're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong." So I had to get creative and curious about, so what would be the way that you would like me to wake you? You're doing it wrong. I said, "Well, how about I pretend I'm you and you are me, and you come and wake up um, your papa, and you wake me up like I'm you, and do exactly the way that you would like me to do it." And then she went on to show me how. And so it became a game. And the next day and the days after, I was able to wake her up in exactly the way she wanted. And that was really due to the fact that I was able to really find that space between the stimulus of her yelling and using a space in between to think about what the best response could be, and really choosing a response that was in the highest version of myself and would be the greatest good for both of us. So, thank you for listening, and I encourage you to, next time you're feeling a strong emotion, to recognize that there is a space and to call upon your team members of curiosity, courage, and compassion to bring you more information before you make the decision to respond. Okay, have a great Friday. Take care. Bye bye.